Hello.
Good morning to everyone. Good afternoon, depending on if you're in Europe, if you're in Spain, or if you're in Australia. It is a great honor for Instituto Cervantes of Sydney, along with my friends from SRAP, Ángel, here with us to start the second conference that we're holding, that we're organizing here in the National Science Week here in Australia, and dedicated to nuclear energy. This is the second conference, as I said before, along with the first one that we held yesterday on stargazing, which was wonderful and incredibly beautiful. Tomorrow we will have a hybrid conference in the premises of Instituto Cervantes in Sydney with science bites with myriad collaborations in our premises in Sydney, and will be also live streaming. Today, it is my pleasure to present a conference dedicated to nuclear energy. And it is an honor as well to work once again, along with my friends from SRAP. Instituto Cervantes as a whole, headquarters, the general director signed an agreement in the year 2019 with the former Minister of Science and Technology in Spain in order to enhance and to promote science, in Spanish, science researchers. And here we are now, Instituto Cervantes of Sydney, working to promote, along with SRAP, our scientists abroad and science in Spanish. It is an honor to present the collaboration tonight of Jaime Redondo, who has interrupted, and he is on vacations now. So it's really, we truly thank you for being here with us. And Mark Ho from Australia's Nuclear Science and Technology Organization. Without further ado, I would like to present once again, our colleague, the president of SRAP, Ángel López, for him to present this conference on nuclear energy and to do the follow-up with our collaborations. Thank you so much for being here today. And I truly hope you will find this conference as interesting as I'm sure will be the three conferences that we've organized for the National Week in Science here in Australia. Thank you once again for being here. Ángel, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Coral, for this very nice introduction, and thank you everyone for joining us this evening here in Australia, in Sydney. It is really a privilege to be sharing these activities for National Science Week with Instituto Cervantes Sydney, that we are doing plenty of things together, just seeking the collaboration between researchers in Australia, in Spain, New Zealand, and other regions in the South Pacific. And yes, we have this special event tonight as because of the National Science Week here in Australia. And the event tonight, it is about nuclear energy, which I think it is a very strong and interesting topic at the moment that we should discuss much more often in the community and in social, in our society. And for that, we have two specialists, Dr. Jaime Redondo and Dr. Mark Ho, who are going to provide a very good overview, I'm sure, of the situation in Europe and also in Australia. So the event tonight is going to be divided into different talks, and let me introduce first the first speaker for tonight, who is Jaime Redondo. And let me also share this with you. So Jaime Redondo, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you very much for having us. It's a pleasure.
It is, yeah, the pleasure is all yours, that is for sure. Jaime has a master's in industrial engineering and he's specialized in power technologies from the Universidad Carlos III de Madrid. He has worked as an energy business consultant for multiple firms in Spain. Most recently, Jaime has worked as a nuclear power operation instructor in a Spanish company called Tecnatom, who has for the past 60 years provided services to the entire Spanish nuclear fleet and to many nuclear power plants and companies around the world. Jaime right now works for Tecnatom USA, developing the training program for an advanced reactor company called Energy, located in Washington, D.C. Jaime is also a member of the board of directors of the Spanish Nuclear Young Generation Network, covering the role of communication manager. And really, it is a privilege to have him with us tonight. And we are going to learn plenty of things tonight, I'm sure about that. And I'm not going to say anything else. I think that, please, all yours. We are just eager for listening your knowledge about all of this situation in nuclear energy in Europe and particularly in Spain.
Thank you very much, Angel. Well, thanks again for having us, both SRAP and Instituto Cervantes. As always, it's always a pleasure for us to be able to inform the general public a little bit more about nuclear energy. We've always thought that one of the Achilles heels of nuclear energy was actually the information that the general public had, and what we've always learned is that the more the general public knows about nuclear energy, the safer they feel, and the more they defend it. So thank you once again for inviting us to talk about nuclear energy in Europe and in Spain in this part of the presentation, and you guys will talk about the Australian status of nuclear energy. So what we're going to see in this presentation is, I've titled it Where We Come From, Where We Are, and Where We're Going, I think, because I can't predict the future, but we'll try to explain a little bit where the nuclear sector is going in particular in Europe and in Spain. Just want to make sure that you all see my screen. Can you confirm?
Yes.
Perfect. So prepared a little presentation. The first thing that we're gonna see is what we're not gonna see in this presentation. Then we'll cover where do we come from, where are we right now in the nuclear energy sector, and where we think we're going right now is we are in a very interesting time for nuclear energy. That's one of the reasons I bet that you guys decided to have this talk. Because of everything that's going on in the world, because of the energy crisis that right now we live in, because of the situation that we have right now in Europe, and obviously with the globalization, this spreads out to the entire world, and how nuclear energy is again being thought of. And I say again because history repeats itself. So right now, nuclear energy is again being thought of as a possible solution to the problems that the world faces. So what we're not going to see today, even though this talk is for the general public, people who are not very much induced in nuclear energy as a concept and nuclear science, we're not going to see an overview of nuclear science concepts. This is more a topical talk more than a scientific talk. So we're not going to do an overview of nuclear science concepts, even though we do encourage you to go to our YouTube channel, Jóvenes Nucleares, in which we have content specialized and very much in detail that covers all of these nuclear science concepts. So let's start with a little bit of history about nuclear energy, where we come from. The nuclear science, the nuclear energy program starts around the 1960s. It starts developing a series of reactors, and we start to see the first nuclear fever, let's say, in the 1980s. It is produced by the oil crisis in the 1970s, the two oil crises that we have. in which countries start to see how dependent they are of all these oil exporting countries, and they start to seek to be more energy independent. This is a concept that right now is very much in all the discussions that all these countries nowadays are having. They start to seek to be more energy independent, and thus they realize that nuclear energy could be the solution to their problems. So they start to develop ambitious nuclear programs in the 1980s. Why do these ambitious nuclear programs come to a stall? We have two factors, which are the accident in Chernobyl, which happens in 1986, which starts to convey the possibility that nuclear energy might not be as safe as we thought it was, and how dangerous or how potentially hazardous nuclear energy can become. But it's not, once we start to dig into the details, it's not all because of Chernobyl. There's a big economic crisis because of the huge inflation and the big increase in interest rates of money. I don't know if this sounds a bit familiar right now, but this economic crisis, what it does is it completely halts these ambitious nuclear programs that we were talking about. Many of the demands for new nuclear power plants that we had in countries such as the United States come to a stall, and what we have is all those nuclear power plants that have been developed until the 1980s are pretty much the ones that we have nowadays. Once we started the decade of the 1990s, not many new nuclear programs are developed. We jump into the 2000s and we start to see new nuclear designs. The 1980s is what we have the first commercial nuclear power plants, which we call Generation 2 designs. And then in the 2000s, we start to see new designs, Generation 3 and 3 plus that we call it, which lead to new nuclear projects. These new designs have enhanced safety, but we start to see that the experienced workforce that had built the nuclear power plants in the 1980s is approaching retirement. And so much of the knowledge that they have is starting to be lost by the nuclear energy sector. And so what we start to see is we're going to start to see a delay in these new nuclear projects. And also we're going to start to see some overcosts in these new nuclear projects. Also, the efforts are very much focused on development of emerging renewable sources of energy. And we'll see why that might be a problem. It's not that there's a false dichotomy of either nuclear or renewable. That's something that we fight straight on, because there's no such false dichotomy. That the renewables and nuclear do live together, and that's the model that we defend from Jóvenes Nucleares and the Spanish Nuclear Society, that an energy mix of renewables backed up by nuclear is what is going to help us fight this climate emergency in which we live nowadays. But we are in the 2000s. New designs are leading to new nuclear projects. In the 2000s, more countries are starting to develop nuclear programs, and they're thinking about building more nuclear reactors. But in the year 2011, we have the tragic accident at Fukushima Daiichi, and social perception of nuclear energy completely plummets. Acceptance of nuclear energy goes down drastically, and many countries decide to completely phase out from nuclear energy. In Europe, which is the case that we're talking about right now, Germany decides to completely phase out nuclear energy. At the time, they had 17 operating reactors. Right now, we're going to see that they have 3 operating reactors, which were, and I say were, and I emphasize were, because this is just brand news from just a couple of days ago, breaking news. They have decided that they're not going to close out the 3 reactors that they have right now in operation at the end of the year, which was their plan. But they decided to phase out nuclear energy, and from 2011 to 2022, which we are nowadays, they have closed 14 of the 17 nuclear reactors that they had in operations. And what we see is that these few new nuclear projects that we had developing fall into delays and fall into huge overcost. We have the example of the EPR in France, in Flamanville. We have the example of the EPR in Olkiluoto. Then we have in the United States, we have the example of Visi Summer. We have the example of Vogel, which are 4 new nuclear reactors that were supposed to be in operation a few years ago already, and they still haven't started. And it is expected that they will be finished and in operation within the next couple of years. We've seen where we come from. Let's see where we are right now. And it's very hard to right now do a standstill picture of the current nuclear situation because of what I just explained, how nuclear energy is being again looked at as a possible solution, as a potential solution to fight climate change, and also to seek this energy independence that was already talked about in the 1980s. Right now in Europe, we have 134 operating reactors. We see that up to 1/3, over 1/3 of that is in France, and the rest is very much spread out around all Europe. We have the Belgium, we have the Czech Republic, Hungary, Spain, Sweden, and then Ukraine and the United Kingdom as the ones with the most reactors in operation. But we'll see that some of these countries have a plan to increase that nuclear capacity, and some of these countries have a plan to decrease this nuclear capacity or phase out their nuclear program. And some countries are rethinking it right now. As we just explained, the example of Germany, who is not alone. More countries are rethinking their nuclear phase out, and we'll see what the situation is. Where are we right now in terms of new reactors? Is nuclear energy or nuclear power plants being built in Europe? I wanted to put a context, first of all, of reactors under construction in the entire world. Why? Because it will give us a picture of where nuclear energy is in the world, because the approach is very different in emerging countries and in first powers against the situation in Europe. So we see right now that there are up to almost 60 new reactors being developed, are under construction in the world, but only 5 are under construction in Europe. One just actually was connected to the grid, which was the one that I just talked about, the EPR in Finland. And then we have the one in France, which we've already talked about. That's the one that's shown in the picture. That has had great delays. We have a couple in Slovakia, and we have a couple in the UK that are being built right now. However, many countries, especially in Eastern Europe, we talk about Poland, we talk about the Czech Republic, we talk about Hungary. Many of these countries are showing a lot of interest in building what we will see are the small modular reactors, which we'll explain what they are in a bit, and we'll dive a little bit more into detail about it. But what we're seeing is a renaissance in nuclear interest right now, and pushback in nuclear phase out right now. We'll see with a map later on what I mean. But what I want to highlight in this slide is how nuclear power right now is being pushed in the world by first-class powers such as China, the United States. Japan is thinking about reopening, or is going to reopen all of their nuclear reactors after the accident that happened 11 years ago at Fukushima Daiichi. South Korea is, again, which is a big nuclear power, is again having a pro-nuclear and very much aggressive policy. So what we're seeing is the world is shifting again towards nuclear energy, and in Europe, we're seeing a situation in which we're pushing back a little bit on this trend, but led primarily by France and the United Kingdom and the Eastern European countries. Europe is more and more turning again towards nuclear energy, and we'll see a little bit about that later on, what I mean by that. And then in terms of long-term operation refers to continuous operation of nuclear power plants who were intended originally to be operational for a certain amount of time, but who can expand that lifespan, provided that they maintain and improve safety and reliability levels, and apply the safety and reliability levels, these improvements to structural, systematic, and component safety requirements. In France, for example, most of their 40-year-old fleet is being extended or is going to be extended to up to 60 years, which entails a considerable expense, and thus it explains why the nuclear energy sector requires such a steady legal framework. Investments take a lot of time to be recovered, and thus the nuclear energy sector requires a very steady legal framework and cannot absorb policy changes that happen in the short term. If we focus in Spain, all reactors in Spain have been approved to extend their lifetime over 40 years, the 7 reactors that we have. However, right now, as it stands, the Energy and Climate Integrated National Plan includes the nuclear phase out from 2027 to 2035. In 2027, we would stop the first reactor out of our 7 reactors, and in 2035 we would stop the last one of them in a scalinated nuclear phase out. But as I've said, Europe is rethinking their strategy towards nuclear energy because of the climate emergency in which we are involved in right now. And to complement the existing policy frameworks, 7 European Green Deal initiatives have been adopted to achieve the European strategic long-term vision for a prosperous, modern, competitive, and climate-neutral economy. And among these initiatives, we have the what we call the taxonomy regulation, which establishes a framework to facilitate sustainable investment, which provides appropriate definitions to companies. So what it does is pretty much it points to companies and investors which economic activities can be considered environmentally sustainable. And the European Parliament has backed up recently, just last month, the inclusion of nuclear energy in the UE taxonomy. Thus, what it means is Europe is telling companies and investors that nuclear energy is a green energy, that it helps in our fight against climate change, and that investors should invest in nuclear energy as a green energy to tackle climate change in the future. Like I said, right now, the global situation in the world is shifting. It is a moving situation towards nuclear energy. And what we have here is a graphic that was made by our friend, nuclear operator at Operador Nuclear in Twitter, a very famous divulger of nuclear energy in the world. And what we see right now is the point that we've just been talking about, how many countries even are whether are operating nuclear reactors or constructing right now nuclear reactors, or have solid plans to construct nuclear power plants, and how first world powers such as Germany, who has been very adamant of nuclear energy and who has been against nuclear energy in the past is rethinking their nuclear phase out. And like we've said, right now, they're canceling the nuclear phase out, at least for the time being. Other countries such as Belgium are doing the same. Right now, what we see is that in Spain, we see that the government's position is still to continue with the nuclear phase out, and thus what we try to do is explain to society why it is important that nuclear in Spain is not phased out. But as we're seeing right now, the world is shifting towards nuclear energy. Many emerging countries are using nuclear energy as a means to their development, and we're going to see that probably in the future in Europe. The situation right now with Ukraine and Russia is making countries understand how dependent they are in fossil fuels that comes from unstable regions, and how this energy independence that we talked about back in the 1980s is so important, and how nuclear energy is one of these means to get that energy independence. Let's see right now where we're going. What is the future of nuclear energy? Nuclear energy is, like I've said, I think before in the presentation, living what I call a nuclear renaissance. We are seeing many new things in the nuclear energy, and we think that right now the table is set for nuclear energy to do great things in this decade that we are involved right now in the 2020s. Then by the start of the 2030s, we expect that nuclear energy will be a big player in the energy sector. Why is that? First of all, we have what we call the small modular reactors, or SMRs, which are nuclear reactors with a power output under 300 electric megawatts. What we have, our traditional nuclear power plant, is usually above 1,000 megawatts, electric megawatts, and thus, first of all, they impose a big economic investment in case of interest in nuclear energy. They are not scalable in terms of all of the projects are turn-on-key projects, and they are very much customized. These small modular reactors, even though the current fleet is very much safe, these small modular reactors introduce safety enhancements even further, and they are flexible in terms of they can help us achieve this synchronization that we need with renewable energy. One of the problems that from renewable energy is that renewable energy is not consistent. We cannot produce renewable energy on demand. The wind blows whenever the wind blows, and the sun shines whenever the sun shines. And the problem that we have is that we cannot store that electric energy that the renewable energies produce. And so what we need is a backup source of electricity, which is clean, which can be produced on demand, and which can synchronize with the variability of renewable sources. So those are some of the problems that we have right now. And what we have with small modular reactors is that they tackle all these problems, because since they are smaller, they are more economical. The investment that is needed is a lot lower. They are scalable in terms of they can be produced at factories, and thus reducing the cost and the time of construction. They are safer because they introduce some safety enhancements to their designs, and they are flexible because since they're smaller and they are produced in modules, they can vary their electricity output a lot quicker. Right now, we have more than 70 designs being developed worldwide, and some of them are already in operation. And currently, companies such as NuScale, Rosatom, or General Electric have already signed agreements for constructions of these reactors. We also have what we call the Generation 4 reactors. We've already talked about Generation 2 reactors, Generation 3 and 3 plus reactors before in our talk. And right now, the state of the art in terms of nuclear energy are the Generation 4 reactors. These set of designs of nuclear reactors are mostly under investigation and are expected to be operational around the next decade, the 2030. Right now, I personally am involved in the development of one of these designs, and it is expected that it should be operational around 2025, 2027. These Generation 4 reactors base their targets on 8 technological goals, which are improved safety. As you can see, safety is always paramount and is always in the conversation of nuclear energy, because nuclear energy is the safest energy source in the world, backed up by statistics. But we always strive to make our technology even safer. So some of these goals are improved safety, improved proliferation resistance, which means let's make sure that we only use nuclear energy for specific purposes, and the nuclear energy that is used for specific purposes cannot be used for nefarious purposes. With minimization, we do know that one of the problems that we have with nuclear energy is that the byproducts of nuclear energy are radioactive and thus potentially hazardous, potentially dangerous. Utilization of natural resources and reduced construction and operating costs. We've talked about how this is one of the Achilles heels of the nuclear energy nowadays, construction times and operating costs, as well as construction costs. These Generation 4 reactors introduce this technological goals in the mix. Currently, there are multiple initiatives, such as the United States Advanced Reactor Development Program, which is the one that I am involved in right now, that promote the development of this generation of reactors. And then we have what we call Advanced Technological Fuels, ATFs. It also started up as being called accident tolerant fuels. Why is that? Because first of all, one of their goals is that they improve the response in accident conditions. One of the problems that we have with nuclear energy is not one of the problems, one of the features that we have in nuclear energy is the amount of energy that is stored in those atoms, and the fact that after the chain reaction is stopped, we still have heat production in our fuel, and thus what we need to do is keep refrigerating, keep cooling this fuel. And in accident conditions, that's one of our challenges, to cool the fuel. These new fuels, these advanced technological fuels, improve that response in accident conditions, and also improve the fuel performance under operating conditions. These fuels are currently, some of them are currently being installed in operating nuclear power plants, together with conventional fuel, and some of it is being developed and should be available, like I said, in this upcoming decade. Also, where are we in terms of, or where are we going in terms of waste management, radioactive waste management? The solution that has, the scientific solution that has been achieved are geological repositories, deep geological repositories, which is a way of storing hazardous or radioactive waste in a stable geological environment that is typically at a depth of 200 to 1,000 meters. Right now, the Swedish government has announced that construction of the final repository for used nuclear fuel can proceed in Sweden, making it the first country to license such a facility. The rest of the countries have, for example, Spain, have plans of building one of these deep geological repositories in order to manage their long-term waste, and will be constructing them in the future. The energy and climate integrated plan that we talked about in Spain recognizes the need to build one of these geological repositories, and it is expected to be in operation in the upcoming decades. And then in order to finish our presentation, because I've gone a little bit over time, but I hope you will excuse me. Every time that we talk about nuclear energy, we always talk about, we're always asked about fusion. So what is the status of fusion energy, and where are we going? Fusion research projects right now continue on. It is not something that's going to happen within the next decade or within the next couple of decades. Probably we won't have a commercial fusion nuclear power plant until the second half of the century. But we do have some bright news. Researchers at the joint European tourists in the United Kingdom have managed to double previous records by producing a total of up to almost 60 megajoules from fusion in a period of 5 seconds. And ITER, which is the major international project to build a 500 megawatt tokamak fusion device with an input of 50 megawatts. Again, if you want to know a little bit more of the science concepts of nuclear energy, we do invite you to see our material in our YouTube channel, which is designed to demonstrate the feasibility of fusion as a large-scale carbon-free energy source. Plans to reach first plasma by 2025, with deuterium-tritium fusion experiments to begin by 2035. So, like I said, we shouldn't be expecting fusion commercial power plants until the second half of the century, but fusion research projects do continue on, and hopefully we'll have either us or our children or our grandchildren will have access to this tremendous resource of energy, which will be having the sun in our planet Earth. So just wanted to thank you very much for your attention, and I'm open to any questions that you guys have. Feel free.
Thank you very much, Jaime, for this wonderful presentation. I have actually plenty of questions by myself and also some few other things, but let's wait for getting some few questions for the audience. We have a couple of them here on Zoom. I will be happy if you want to unmute yourself and go ahead and do the question. Coral, I think that you are the first one. You want to ask just question, please?
Lo pregunto directamente. I just,
yeah.
Okay, I can just ask it. A lot of people are following us in our channels in YouTube or Facebook. One of the ideas or that arises, not today, but also in the previous weeks that we've been promoting this conferences about the topic nuclear energy. So why is SRAP and Instituto Cervantes now talking about nuclear energy? It's a topic that has been talked about so much in these days. All the geopolitical issues and all that, energy-wise, is very important to know what we have. But there's a long way to go communication-wise for the general public, as you said before. I truly think that much should be done to communicate to the general public, which are the voters, which are, of course, along with their votes, who more or less manage, for instance, in Europe, or even, of course, if we pin it down to Spain, which there's a lot of, you showed it in the presentation. Spain was the only one that was not rethinking the nuclear phase. My question is, what can we do? What can institutions do to help in that communication? I think there's a long way to go, as in to communicate why this is important, why there's sometimes in Spain a negative point of view from the nuclear energy, and it's not related to a clean energy. What can we do? Suggestions or? way to go.
Well, first of all, what we can do is this that we're doing right now, and the thing is that this hasn't been done in the past. Nuclear energy is a very complex topic from the science standpoint, and thus, because it is complex in a science standpoint, there hasn't been an effort in the past to try to explain it to the general public. Just the people who understood it know how safe it is, and thus they have imposed their either their technological knowledge upon society, and we haven't questioned nuclear energy. Is anyone questioning nuclear energy in the medical fields? We walk into a radiography room at a hospital every single day, and no one is questioning whether that radiation is safe for them, is beneficial for them, is hazardous for them. We just trust the doctor, and we trust that they know what's best for us, and we just go into their hands. And first of all, that's how it should be, because they are working in the name of science. Same thing happens with nuclear energy, or has happened with nuclear energy. We have just imposed nuclear energy on society, but we haven't explained nuclear energy to society in the past. From what I remember, the first big effort in order to talk about nuclear energy comes from Operador Nuclear, after the accident of Fukushima, in which everyone turns against nuclear energy. Why? Because they don't understand it. But no one actually understands that not a single person died in Fukushima from radioactivity, from radioactive release from nuclear power plants. People did die from the earthquake, and people did die in the evacuation of Fukushima. But no one actually died from radiological consequences. That's not a fact that people really know. People think that thousands of people died because of the radiation in Fukushima. People think that the water in Fukushima is radioactive and is hazardous, which is not. And people actually think that all the way in Australia, the water that was leaked from Fukushima is hazardous to the population in Australia, New Zealand, and all these people that are listening to us from the Pacific, which is also not true. So the first effort came from Operador Nuclear in order to relax, to calm the public down, and to tell them, first of all, everything's okay, everything is not as bad as some media are making you think it is. And but also the effort comes from the standpoint of let's do a paradigm shift, and let's just stop having you take my word for it. Let's explain to you what nuclear energy is, how it works. Let's try to put it in the simplest terms possible, because not everyone has the opportunity that I've had to be an engineer, to study nuclear energy for so many years. So it is my job, or it is our job, first of all, to put this information in the simplest terms, and then to try to get that message out there. And that's what institutions such as Instituto Cervantes are doing right nowadays. We're getting, it is right now when we're getting calls from the media whenever there's a story on nuclear energy, in order to ask us, as experts, to explain to them what it really means. What we've seen always in the past is people who really don't know what they're talking about, who are not scientists, talk about nuclear energy. So this is the first time that the scientists have understood the problem, and have understood how people are afraid of what they don't understand, and that we cannot just be still and say, well, I understand that nuclear energy is safe, so I'm calm. But we actually have to help people understand what nuclear power is, why it is safe, so that nuclear acceptance of so that public acceptance of nuclear energy can be an exercise that's done by by everybody as a whole.
Yes, it is. I think you have just provided a wonderful answer to this question. I actually had a very similar question to you, so I'm just going to mention it quickly. But we have some few more questions also in the chat. But you mentioned that very recently nuclear energy have been included as a green energy by Europe, and with something that perhaps should have happened even a bit more some time ago, because we know people who understand how nuclear energy works will know it is not only safe but completely green. But the question was how to change that perception also in the public, that it is safe and it is something that we can use. Because I still think that there are many people that have the idea, the very wrong idea, that you can get and even create a nuclear weapon using the material that you have in a nuclear reactor, in a standard nuclear facility. So very briefly, can you add something else about that?
The way to do it is information. That's the solution. Information. We have to inform the public. That's what we found that works. Whenever you inform the public, we don't try to. Our objective is not to make people pro-nuclear. Our objective is, I always say that my objective is for anti-nuclears to understand why they are against nuclear energy, and for them to be able to give convincing arguments of why they are against nuclear energy, not because nuclear energy is dangerous and a nuclear power plant can explode as a nuclear bomb. That's just scientifically impossible. So that's our purpose, to inform public of nuclear energy. So the way to do what you were talking about, Angel, is information. We have to get out there. Yep. We haven't gotten out there, and we have to get out there to inform the public and for them to have an informed decision.
Fully agree with that. Francisco Paco Sanchez Bayo is actually providing some extra info in the chat, and he also has a question. So do you mind, Paco, to unmute yourself and answer the last thing that you wrote in the chat? Because I think it links very nicely, and then ask the question you have, please.
Which one? The one about the risk?
Yes, about the risk.
Okay, so the risk is simply, I mean, I work on risk assessment of chemicals, all right? And I just noticed it's very difficult, really, to convey this idea of risk. I mean, each one of us gets into a car every day, you know? But the risk of dying on a car accident is huge. It's huge compared to the risk, for example, of a plane falling and killing all the passengers, right? So we know that statistically it's proven. What is the worst means of transport, you know, in terms of from the risk of dying? It's the car, you know, and no one worries, no one questions that, you know. So it's a bit the same when you talk about nuclear energy. So the risk of accidents, two major accidents have happened in the world, you know, Chernobyl and Fukushima. Fukushima was a natural disaster due to an earthquake, but it was also due to the negligence of the bureaucrats that managed the plant, because that plant should have been decommissioned. They extended the life and said, oh, okay, you know, why should we bother? You know, let's keep it going. You know, and the accident came because of that. Otherwise, that plant would have been closed by the time the earthquake happened. So that was negligence. Chernobyl, we know, it was just due to incompetence and negligence of the people as well. Of course, the consequences of those disasters can be big, not because the number of people who die, but also because the restriction that imposes for many other things, the activities of the people in a large area that is affected for a long time, right? But it's only 2 accidents. And how many nuclear power stations do we have in the world? A few hundreds. And they have been going on for 50 years and nothing has happened. And we all benefit, you know, reap the benefits of that energy. But exactly, so it's difficult to communicate to people that really the risk is minimal if it's managed properly, and the benefits are huge compared to other forms of energy. There are more accidents happening in, for example, coal power stations that kill people, kill workers there, than the risk and the accidents happening in nuclear power. So if all that information is conveyed properly, I mean, I don't know how to do it, you try to do it, but you have to get really psychologists and people who know how to convey this message to the general population, not only with graphs and so on and good advertisements, but where to tackle the real issue so that people can grasp that there is no real problem. Yep. And as I say, I work on risk assessment of chemicals, but I always been in favor of nuclear energy as a green energy, as you say. It's much better.
Paco. Yeah. Let me tell everybody, particularly Jaime, that you are one of the founders member of SRAP and part of the board, and we have been talking in many different occasions about different topics in science. So I think we are actually appreciated and valuing and providing value to this addition that you are providing today. So thank you very much for that. Do you have a question? You have a question also there for Jaime. Do you mind to ask it?
The question about
the countries like Spain buy the yellow cake from producers.
that was the first one. Yeah, no, yeah. I'm a bit surprised because, again, it's the same story. Yeah, I mean, we had to do something about the waste. This is a problem. One of the solutions is what you say, make a hole there and bury there. That's fine. But, no one questions, the risk of transporting the actual raw material, the uranium from Australia to different countries that are using nuclear energy. But really, the best place to put the waste is in the mine where the uranium was extracted in the first place. That's the best place. That's the natural place where the uranium came from. Send it back. We try to do the same thing with other with plastics, containers, and so on. Let the companies get the plastic containers back to the factory. So shouldn't be that the way to do things, really, rather than going to.
But can we get the answer from Jaime, because probably it is not that straightforward. I know.
Yes. So first of all, when we talk for the public that doesn't understand the term yellow cake, obviously uranium, as it is extracted from the ore, it's not what we put in a nuclear reactor. We have to transform that uranium into uranium oxide, which is what we introduce in the reactor. And the yellow cake is one of those states in which the enriched uranium is transported and then manufactured into those uranium pellets that those pellets that we put into our nuclear reactor. So the difference is, Paco, perdona, that when we extract the uranium from the mine, it is not closely as radioactive, not even close to the radioactivity levels that it has once it comes out of the reactor. What we do is we do put it back in mines, but we have to put it back in highly stable mines from a geological standpoint. They have to be geologically stable. That means places that have been there for thousands and millions of years. That usually works for salt mines, etc. Places that we know that are not affected by earthquakes and that will not their structure will not be compromised. So some of these uranium mines, their structure can be compromised because of natural disasters such as earthquakes, or we don't know either whether they are hydraulically sealed. They might have leaks, water leaks from rainwater. So what we look for is, like you're saying, mines, but that are highly stable, and those are usually either salt mines or clay formations that have been there, and we know that have been there for thousands and millions of years, and that will stay that way in the future, because as we know, the byproducts of the reactor can be radioactive for up to 100,000 years. So what we need to do is we need to make sure that mine will be there for 100,000 years, and for the uranium mines from which we extract the uranium ore, we cannot guarantee that.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Jaime. We have a couple of extra questions from Carmen Diaz. If you want to unmute yourself, however, I'm going to ask both of you to be very brief, because we have been already, it is more than 6:30 p.m. here, and we still have the second contribution to go ahead. But I think it's really interesting, the question that Carmen has. So you want to unmute yourself and ask, Carmen? Probably. Let me read it for you. Carmen says, I understand that to produce nuclear energy there is a lot of pollution. What is the benefit then? Also, in this violent world, should we risk having nuclear plants?
Those are I love those questions, Carmen, because those are concepts that are very much embedded in society, and they are scientifically wrong. So that's why we need to understand, that's why we need to get out there and, as I said before, inform the public as much as possible. First of all, you state that nuclear energy produces a lot of pollution. Well, nuclear energy actually does not produce any pollution whatsoever. It does not emit any greenhouse gases, since we don't have a combustion reaction happening in a nuclear reactor. What we have is a nuclear fission reaction, which doesn't emit any type of greenhouse gases, doesn't emit any CO2. Thus, it is the production of nuclear energy is not polluting at all. And the emissions from the nuclear cycle are comparable to those from wind energy or hydro energy. Even solar energy, throughout its entire lifetime, is more polluting than nuclear energy. With this, I'm not saying that solar energy is polluting, but what I'm saying is nuclear energy produces the same amount of pollution as do renewable sources, which is close to nothing. And obviously nothing if we compare it to fossil fuels. So that's the first thing. The benefit then is we can produce energy on demand. Electricity is not available in nature. Electricity is a vector, is not a source of energy. Thus, we need to produce electricity from other sources. The sources that we right now have are either renewable sources, fossil fuels, or nuclear energy. It's those three that we have. Renewable sources are great. We've talked about how they don't emit any greenhouse gases. The problem is that they are intermittent. We cannot rely on renewable sources all the time, because they're not present all the time, and we cannot store their energy, at least for the time being. Storage development is still a very much ongoing process, and I always say the same thing. We can expect those type of batteries the same time that we can expect the fusion reactor. It's been talked about for a lot of time, but the technology is nowhere near mature enough right now. Yes, we do have small batteries that are rechargeable in our houses, but not at the scale that we need. And thus we need to compromise, because renewables are not going to be able to absorb all of the demand, and we need to choose an energy source that is available on demand. Those are only fossil fuels and nuclear energy. That's that. You also mentioned in this violent world, should we risk having nuclear power plants? We do live in a violent world, but nuclear power plants cannot be used for malicious purposes. The amount of enrichment that the nuclear power plants have, the amount of enriched uranium that the nuclear power plants have, is not usable for malicious purposes. However, nuclear weapons can be used as nuclear fuel in commercial reactors, as it has been done since the Cold War. many of the nuclear warheads that were decommissioned after the scale down by the Soviet Union and the United States have been used in order to produce energy. But those are two completely separate worlds. That's why we have the International Atomic Energy Agency, which is the branch from the United Nations that makes sure that nuclear energy is used only for peaceful purposes, and that has an entire section which is called a safeguard section to make sure that the non-proliferation treaty is accepted by all the countries who have access to nuclear energy. And those are the two questions that you were talking about. I believe that when you were talking about contamination, you're talking about the accidents. That's a very long discussion that I would love to have in this forum, but because of time constraints, I invite you again to go to all of our content that we have in our YouTube channel, in which we talk in extension about all these topics.
Yeah, definitely. We have to continue this conversation. We have to continue chasing people and informing people and getting specialists like yourself who have provided a wonderful overview of the situation of nuclear energy in not only in Europe and also in Spain and also worldwide. That I appreciate a lot. So thank you very much, Jaime Redondo, Jóvenes Nucleares, for participating in this special event during National Science Week in Australia, joined between the Instituto Cervantes Sydney and SRAP, the Spanish Research in Australia Pacific. Thank you very much for the contribution.
Thank you very much for having us. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Okay, well, now we are going to have the second talk of the event. Unfortunately, the speaker was not possible to join us today this evening, but we have pre-recorded the talk, and that is what I'm going to offer to you now. Thank you very much for staying for the second talk of this event for National Science Week between the SRAP, the Spanish Researchers in Australia Pacific, and in collaboration with the Instituto Cervantes Sydney. It is my pleasure for this second talk to introduce to Dr. Mark Hall, who is a reactor dynamic specialist at the Australian Nuclear Science and Technology Organization, UNSTO. He's interested in reactor designs, computational fluid dynamics, and coding, and has supervised numerous master and PhD students. Mark is active in IAEA discussions on the topic of small modular reactors, and serves as Vice President of the Australian Nuclear Association, a professional organization promoting the peaceful, safe, and effective use of nuclear science and technology. Welcome, Mark.
Hi, how you doing?
Good. We are really excited to have you today for this talk during National Science Week in Australia in 2022, particularly talking about this topic of how the status of the nuclear energy in Australia, and you are a specialist of that. So thank you very much for joining us today.
Great. So what I'll do is I'll just share my screen. So thanks for the introduction. So as I said, I'm Dr. Marco. I've been working at ANSTO for the last 20 years, primarily focused on supporting the operation of the Opal research reactor, which we're very proud of. So I'm going to give to you a fairly quick introduction about Australia's kind of energy generation, electricity generation, in order to provide some context when we talk about the possible, if we were to have nuclear power, how that might look like and where it might fit. So without further ado, so I just want to start off with this graphic of the Opal research reactor. This is actually a relatively new research reactor. It was built back in 2006, has been switched on back in 2006. It's a highly productive reactor. It doesn't make any power at all, but it makes a lot of medical radioisotopes. And you can see along here, just surrounding the core, a lot of facilities which we cook medical radioisotopes. We make such things as molybdenum-99, which is one of the fission products from the splitting of the uranium atom. And we can extract that in order to derive from that technetium-99 that works as a radioactive tracer for such things as cancer diagnostics and things like that. And of course, we also have neutron beam tubes that look near the core of that reactor, which you can see in that bright blue square. And the neutrons are basically used for the examination of material structures. So this very much is a very, very highly productive science machine because it's on 300 days out of 365 days a year. And to put that in context, that's almost similar to the average uptime or the capacity factor or availability of power reactors around the world. So, very, very much indeed, this is paying lots of dividends for Australian science. So, just, wanted to put this up because when a lot of people say, Australia doesn't have actually nuclear know-how, I would say emphatically yes, because we do have an operational research reactor. And in fact, I would say that sometimes you could think of the operational complexity of this reactor is kind of almost on par, if not beyond, power reactors as well, just because of its high availability and the complexity of its operations. Very simply, for instance, the reactor is actually runs on a 30-day cycle. So it's on for 30 days and then it's off for 5 days. And some of the fuel might be shuffled around in order to extract the maximum potential of that fuel. And that on and on it goes throughout the whole year to give us a very, very high availability. So this is where we're coming from, the Opal research reactors near Sydney. And it's actually within the suburbs of Sydney, and it's just kind of producing away very happily. So, for the international audience, I'm not sure what the audience is today, but a very quick numbers for Australia is that, we've got about 25 million people. We've got a very large continent. GDP is rather high, about $63 trillion US dollars a year. And electricity production is also very high as well. And that's because, we have a lot of very strong resource industry in which we have to handle and process bulk material. And as a result of that, the electricity production was in the order of about 265 terawatt hours in the year 2019, 2020. So if you look at what we call in the parlay of the electrical network, the NEM, or the National Electricity Market, the 5 states on the eastern seaboard are connected by transmission lines and also by gas pipelines as well, whereas WA is kind of somewhat removed in the west. And although you might say, wow, we've got this large electricity grid, but in fact, there are lots of bottlenecks in terms of the connection of that grid. And you can see that in the heat map of the electrical grid on the on the right graphic. And you can almost kind of think of it as if you have, say, in Chile, for instance, you have actually a very, very long grid, which has to distribute a lot of power up and down that transmission, but the loads are actually concentrated in those centers of population and industry. And that's part of the reason why historically the grid has been very effective, because you usually have a lot of coal power generation, about say 70% or 65% of electricity generated by coal. And those coal-fired power plants are pretty close to the major cities. And also as well, you can see why, you've got this gas grid as well, or gas network, because you're basically pulling in those gas resources from those areas that are far away from the low demand centers, and they have to be transported towards the city. And of course, when we're talking about thinking about nuclear powers, in this present day and age, we're really talking about the context of being able to provide low carbon baseload generation. And I'd just like to bring this up because if you look at electricitymap.org, you can actually see that for the 3 major isolated states of Queensland, New South Wales, and Victoria are rather brown, meaning that the carbon footprint is rather high because they've basically got a lot of brown and black coal power generators. And that stands in contrast to, say, France, which might derive about 65% of the national electricity with nuclear power. And overall, in their energy mix, they might have a carbon footprint of, say, 64 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour produced, compared to, say, something that might be 600 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour average, spread out throughout Australia. So here is more of a bigger a more clearer bar graph of each individual state. And you can see very easily, in the state of Victoria, New South Wales, and Queensland, that coal-fired power generation dominating. So the other thing that Australia is contending with is the imminent, basically, retirement of these coal-fired assets. And very, very recently, we've been hearing a lot of news about Liddell going down in 2023 maybe. But then further on, these coal-fired assets are going to be finding it hard to keep on generating, simply because we have a policy shift which is away from these high carbon generation energy sources, and that's something that needs addressing. Whether we transition to a highly renewables kind of generation set, or we might get a combination of storage or gas, that's yet to be decided. And I would say that, what's under contention, of course, is how do we actually create an energy mix which is the lowest carbon footprint possible, but as well as the same time to make it as cheap as possible and as reliable as possible as well. In this way, what we're actually thinking about is actually to address what is known as the Energy Trilemma. So, of course, when we talk about nuclear power, in fact, we're not allowed to generate nuclear power to be transmitted to the grid. There is a federal law banning that, and that is the EPBC Act, or the Environmental Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act. And that's a federal piece of legislation introduced in 1999. But on top of that as well, there are also state-based legislation in New South Wales and Victoria that also prevents nuclear power from entering the grid. And so if we were to be contemplating nuclear power, these laws will have to be reviewed and maybe amended as well. So in terms of nuclear activities in Australia, a lot of people don't know that we actually export a lot of uranium. In fact, we export so much uranium that the amount of power, energy in that uranium ore is actually able to pretty much satisfy the complete electricity generation nationally, annually. And so we actually have about 30% of the economically recoverable reserves, global reserves for uranium. Other activities as well, which we're doing very well, is the National Radioactive Waste Management Facility, which has gotten the planning approval to be installed in Kimber in South Australia. And Australia is also a signature and a contributor to the Generation 4 reactor forum. So these are to look at the more advanced reactor types, such as the high temperature gas reactors and molten salt reactors, which is undergoing lots of research and development around the world. So Australia needs to be in touch with those developments, because obviously we export a lot of uranium, and any kind of progress in that area will affect our uranium exports as well. As I mentioned, we operate the Opal reactor very well, 300 days a year. And also in the last kind of 3-4 years, there's been lots of activities on the state and federal level to look into what nuclear power means. So there were the Royal Commission into the prerequisites for nuclear power from the federal government, and there was also New South Wales and Victorian and South Australian Royal Commissions into the nuclear fuel cycle and nuclear power as well. So any one of you can just kind of look that up on the web and read those findings. So getting back to the actual technology when nuclear power today, what do numbers look like? Well, the operational nuclear fleet, there's about 438 operational reactors around the world, generating about 2.5, 2,500 terawatt hours. That number doesn't really change that much year on year because you have some retirements and also some more reactors introduced. In terms of the spread of technology, the light water reactor technology is dominant. So what I mean by that is that you just use very, very clean tap water to power or to cool a pressurized water reactor or a boiling water reactor. So that's the graphic on the top and the bottom. And then there are little kind of other designs as well, such as the pressurized water, heavy water reactor, the light water graphite moderated reactor, which Russia still operates. That's the gas-cooled reactors, which the UK operates, and also the fast breeder reactor as well. So these are the more exotic kind of types of reactor using sodium, liquid sodium as the coolant. And the reason for these different types of reactors is that, at the inception or the beginning of the atomic age, a lot of countries actually developed their own type of research on power reactors. And so you can think of it as a legacy flow-on effect from that. However, after all these years, in fact, the pressurized water reactor became the dominant design for reasons of its economy and its safety, okay? And so in at least the immediate future, we're going to be seeing a lot of these pressurized water reactors still to be built and to remain operational. And to give you some context, a wind turbine might say lasts for 20 years, but there are pressurized water reactors which are being licensed up to 60 years and have operated on average 30 years already. So these, pressurized water reactors are actually very, very well maintained, regulated, and basically very well looked after because these high pieces of very dependable assets that can dispatch to the grid, in a very robust and predictable fashion. So in terms of what's happening around the world in new builds, you can see that most of the new builds is concentrated in the Asia Pacific region because, of course, in China and as well as in India, there is a growing population and with a strong demand for electricity. And at the same time, those countries are contending with how do we actually move the energy mix away from a high carbon generation intensity. And so that's why China in the lead with about 17 pressurized water reactors under construction. And these are rather large affairs. We're talking about 1,000 megawatts of nameplate capacity each. The Indians are creating a combination of pressurized water reactors and their own indigenous pressurized heavy water reactors as well. And then other countries are also getting back into rebuilding these larger reactors. So when we're talking about, pressurized water reactors, what are we talking about really? It's actually a fairly simple schematic that you can throw up because you can have a lot of fuel elements here in the core generating heat from the nuclear reaction. You have control rods, which can shut that nuclear reaction down by absorbing the neutrons in that region. And all that heat basically goes to heating water, which is pressurized to about 150 atmospheres. And that heat is donated to the heat exchanger, which has a secondary loop that creates steam to turn the turbine. And then in the primary loop, the water basically flows back through the pump and then back into the core like so. And of course, surrounding this whole contraption is a containment vessel so that if there was a case of, say, like in Fukushima, where you have a meltdown, and most of that reactivity in the fuel bundles, in the sense of all the kind of radioisotopes or the fission products coming from that nuclear reaction, is contained within that containment building. And looking into the nuclear power plants, in the future, what are people trying to be doing? Well, as you might have heard, there's been talk about delays in the build of new large reactors, and partly the reason for that is because the West especially has not been building large reactors for a fair while. I mean, most of the new builds were through from like the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And then, you know, the builds kind of dropped off for whatever reason, because of the rise in renewables, the rise in the amount of gas being mined as well. And now, because of climate change or the need to reduce carbon, you know, many countries around the world are looking at ways of building reactors faster and also designing reactors that are safer as well. So the new reactors have to be more compact. They're thinking of building them in a factory, because of course, if you make things in a factory, it's much more reproducible, and you can have faster builds, and you're able to also reduce the cost of the build as well, because everything can be put on an assembly line. And these reactors have below grade siting, meaning some of the reactors are actually positioned in a large pool, for instance, and then the whole pool is actually underground. And there's a strong onus on passive safety. So what I mean by passive safety is that what we want to do is to make sure that that core remains cool even after you shut down. So when you shut down the reactor, what happens is that the the fission products in that fuel assembly is still producing heat. And as a rough measure, 1 hour after you shut down a reactor, that core is producing about 1% of that nominal heat. So you might say, okay, 1% doesn't sound like that much, but if you have a 3,000 megawatt thermal reactor producing 1,000 megawatts of electricity, after you shut it down, it's still producing 30 megawatts of heat, and that heat needs removing. And this is why with Fukushima, for instance, when the power grid got taken out and diesel generators got taken out, they had this problem of being able to remove that heat. The idea with passive safety is that you actually have on site a large water reservoir that can take away that heat without any operator intervention or need for offsite electricity. So if you look at, say, what they're doing with the small modular reactor designs, they're taking a very large contraption of all the different sub-assemblies of the steam generator, the reactor pressure vessel, pump, and pressurizer, and you're basically making a module out of that. And here we've got the NuScale example, and you can also see that in reality, that module is much smaller as well. And that assists with your licensing case for that small modular reactor. So with, again, the NuScale reactor, what they do is that they take those modules and actually put the whole module underneath a common pool. And so that common pool actually is not used during normal cooling operations. It's just there to take away that decay heat if there's, say, a station blackout and they need to shut down without any kind of external power or anything like that. And so there, you know, you've got basically a layout showing that passive safety system. So the third and final part of this quick presentation is look at the climate and environmental factors around nuclear power. So when we're thinking about nuclear, it's really about why it's so interesting is that just this little pellet of uranium dioxide contains a very, very high power, very high energy density. So you can actually derive the equivalent of, say, 3 barrels of oil. So that's about 600 liters, or a ton of coal, or just lots and lots of natural gas. And of course, you know, you have to have a very specialized piece of equipment to do this, which is the reactor. But when we look at, say, the emissions intensity of various energy options, you can see that nuclear is pretty much on par with wind as well as hydro from a kind of life cycle perspective. Obviously, when you first build a nuclear power plant, it takes a lot of work, you have to pour a lot of concrete with the structures, etc. But because it's producing electricity in America, for instance, 90% of the year, and because it lasts for 60 years, for the lifetime of that plant, it actually produces extremely small amounts of CO2. And that's really just from the mining operations of that uranium and the construction of that plant. much lower, of course, compared to, say, coal or biomass or gas or anything like so. And when we look at, say, the materials usage as well, in fact, nuclear is also very low because of that power density of uranium dioxide pellet, the amount of materials used per, per watt hours generated is low compared to all the other options as well. And finally, if you look at the land use of a nuclear power plant, it's extremely concentrated in the manner it generates electricity. And so the plant footprint itself is also extremely low. And I guess this is part of the reason why a lot of communities are thinking about nuclear power because it doesn't really disturb farmland or, the tranquil wilderness, national parks, etc., compared to, say, wind and solar, which might take a lot more real estate. So that's just a very quick summary of nuclear power and where the technology is heading. Unfortunately, I'm not here live to answer questions, but I hope you had a nice kind of presentation and a few facts to take away. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mark, for this wonderful presentation, providing this overview of the situation in Australia, of the nuclear energy in Australia. You actually provided plenty of good facts about how it is at the moment and some few of the good things and challenges, perhaps. I will like to let my colleagues, if any of you have a question, please go ahead.
Hello, Mark. This is Luis Salvador Carulla from the University of Canberra. What do you think about the proposal by Bill Gates, this Terra, I think it's called? It's something different from what you have presented, or?
Yeah, that's very true. So the TerraPower reactor you alluded to by Bill Gates, it's actually a sodium fast reactor. So it's very different from the pressurized water reactors we've been talking about because it uses liquid sodium for cooling. That's the primary loop. And it's supposed to be burning, from my understanding, it uses the accumulated spent fuel from PWR operations over the last 30, 40 years in the US to derive that energy. And so this technology has actually had a very long time, a developmental time frame, because we're talking about the Americans looking into sodium fast reactors with the EBR, the experimental breeder reactor. And that went on to become a design called the PRISM reactor, and that went on to become TerraPower reactor as well. But what's interesting is that the design of that reactor actually uses a molten salt secondary loop. So the idea of that reactor is actually to generate heat and then to deposit that heat into a large salt bank. And that salt doesn't necessarily need to be very expensive either. It's basically what they use in concentrated solar thermal plants, like a nitrate-based solar salt, they call it. And the idea is that when you have this kind of bank of insulated salt, you can extract that heat by turning a turbine during times when electricity prices are very high and demand for electricity is very high. So it's a very, very good concept. And this idea of being able to pull power from a molten salt storage, a thermal storage, isn't just with TerraPower. There are many other advanced reactor vendors that are thinking about this, such as Moltex, such as Terrestrial Energy, and others. And in fact, I mean, a lot of the molten salt reactors, which again is a different design, which is to use molten salt in the primary loop to dissolve the uranium fuel into the primary loop itself, also have a design where they deposit that heat into a thermal energy storage bank.
Should we go next? Go. Hi, my name's Alex Sengupta. I'm from the University of New South Wales. I was wondering if you could say something about the relative costs of new build nuclear versus renewables.
Well, the relative costs of new builds. So there are some figures out there. So, I mean, I'll just use the most relevant figure. So, I mean, there's a lot of discussion about small modular reactors, and currently with, say, the NuScale design, which I think is the most advanced design in the US currently, they've received the Nuclear Regulatory Commission's design certification, so they're actually allowed to be built and switched on. That's in the order of about $3 billion US for the complete plant of 12 modules. So that would be about 4 billion, a little bit more Australian dollars, for instance. And that will give you about, so at the moment, it's licensed for 50 megawatts per module. It could be as high as 77 megawatts per module. And then, as I said, there's 12 modules. So it's about 900 megawatts in total in terms of output. And if you look at the, there is actually a thorough piece of work being done that's been done over at the University of Queensland to translate those numbers into an LCOE number. Well, the range in the levelized cost of electricity for the NuScale plant is anything between $60 to $102 per megawatt hour. And that, of course, is in contrast to just say like a wind turbine, which might be $50 per megawatt hour, something like that, right? But this is actually a really interesting question because it brings to mind what are we really talking about in terms of wholesale cost of electricity on the grid? Because as we all know, it's always going to be an energy mix. And I think what's challenging for people to understand is that, although we might all like nuclear, or we might all like wind, or we might all like solar, the answer to the energy trilemma in the future is how do we actually make a cohesive grid that's always on, but is also low carbon as well. And so I think one of the things that needs to be brought into the argument of what we're arguing for is really what kind of optimal low carbon energy mix should we really be talking about. And so, I would point the audience out to this study that UQ has been doing, which is the, I think it's like UQ kind of like somewhat of a roadmap of how we might look into nuclear power for Australia, like what needs to be considered. And that was headed by Professor Stephen Wilson. So just Google Professor Stephen Wilson, UQ Nuclear, and you'll find that report.
Thank you very much for the question and the answer. I have actually several questions that I would like to ask, but probably the most important one at the moment, it is that you already mentioned that producing energy, nuclear energy in Australia is not allowed. You're not allowed yet to do that.
Yes.
So yes. How are we going to change that? And you have also mentioned that in order that we are moving forward, definitely we have to start depending less of fossil fuels from not only carbon and gas, but we need the mix with something else, renewables, solar power, wind, definitely. And we, in the future, we need that together. So what are you doing for trying to get that vision for the politicians, to the public, to society, to see the real power and of nuclear energy and how safe it is to run this power and how much is helping that fighting climate change?
Yeah, so that's a great question. In fact, I wear two hats. So I am an employee of ANSTO, and I'm a specialist in kind of reactor technology. But at the same time, I also work outside of ANSTO for the Australian Nuclear Association in a kind of like, non-profit professional organization to communicate about nuclear technology. And so the ANA, the Australian Nuclear Association, has already been doing consistently a lot of work to tell the politicians what reactors are, what it means, like in the context of decarbonisation, and how they might find confidence in selling that idea, right? And that's very different from ANSTO, which actually cannot do any lobbying for nuclear power. It completely serves the government, and and only serves to inform the government what's actually happening in the development of nuclear power, and it's up to the politicians to decide. But if you look at the history of where Australia has been going, Australia already was in the governments on a state level as well as on a federal level have already started the process of fact gathering, right? Because we've had, as I mentioned, those royal commissions in New South Wales, Victoria, and South Australia, as well as the federal parliament. And that's how, parliamentarians and parliamentary committees can, on the record, get balanced information on both sides of the argument and then form major and minor reports on their findings. And based on those reports of what they find on nuclear energy, then they can make an argument to the electorate of why we should have a conversation and maybe contemplate nuclear power. And so the other major advance has been the opposition, the federal opposition, the Liberal National Party, has also stated that they will be looking at nuclear power as a policy, as in looking into nuclear power as a possible source of energy in the energy mix in the future as well. And that's a big statement, because then, you're getting one side of politics now talking about nuclear power, and it's possible that you might get bipartisanship. Because, in the end, we need kind of bipartisan support on a federal government level as well as the state level, because, the construction of nuclear power reactors is, a decadal affair, and they're going to be running for like 60 years. So it requires everyone to be on board with that, and that's a conversation to be had.
Yeah, that's good. Do you think it will happen soon, later? Do you have any estimation of timing?
Look, I mean, I really don't know, because we've been working on it for a very long time. I think the momentum is swinging towards nuclear, but we really have to wait and see. It could happen within the next 5 years. It could be happening in 10. But in all seriousness, the urgency of needing to mitigate carbon requires that we take definitive action. So we'll see.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Mark, for that. Do we have any other question or comment?
One last one related to this discussion. Is there an interest from the energy companies in joining this adventure, or they don't pay too much attention to this business now, or are they going with this business?
There have been some closed door discussions on this. I think more and more not only about the thermal generators, but even looking at unions, for example, and looking at local communities, which traditionally have been supported by coal-fired generation. I mean, we tend to demonize coal-fired power plants nowadays, but, they have been a source of prosperity for Australia for a long time because of the economy and because of its reliability and robustness. So, a lot of communities are thinking, what's going to be replacing those coal jobs in the future, right? There are people that are already very invested in the communities. They want to stay there. And so, they're asking, could we possibly have small modular reactors replacing these brownfield sites once the coal-fired power plants shut down? And I think, the coal-fired power plants or the utilities also know this as well. And also even politicians know this as well, because when you start building large amounts of grid infrastructure to support these renewable energy zones, that's a huge amount of investment that might not necessarily be necessary if you've already got small modular reactors at those coal-fired power sites. And, you know, it's something that's kind of in an exploratory phase. I think in the end, the utilities aren't going to move unless they're going to be getting the right signals from the federal and the state governments that they might contemplate nuclear power.
Well, thank you very much. This has been extremely useful, particularly for me. I was really looking forward your talk, Mark, and I think that everyone have enjoyed it a lot. And it has provided a very good overview of how it is at the moment and how we're going, and again, stressing that we would really need the nuclear energy for the future for many different reasons. So thank you very much, Mark Ho from the ANSTO, and everyone for joining in tonight. And hopefully we will be able to contact you again for another event or another activity. We would love to know much more about all of this. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you for the invitation. Good seeing you guys.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Very
Bye-bye.
interesting.
Thank you, Mark.
This has been very interesting. Thank you so much, Mark, and thank you so much, Jaime, for being here tonight with us, with SRAP and with Instituto Cervantes of Sydney. Our goal is to try to boost that communication, to boost the knowledge to the general public, in this case of nuclear energy, and I think we have certainly done so. I have received a lot of feedback on our YouTube channel on why we've selected this, what an interesting topic, and of course that this is a topic that is very up to date nowadays, and we will truly continue on promoting, on boosting this communication of science in general, of nuclear energy in particular. This has been the second conference that we have once again organized with our colleagues, our friends from SRAP here in Instituto Cervantes of Sydney, and our colleagues from SRAP. We will continue to promote the knowledge, in this case of science, and tomorrow in the premises in Instituto Cervantes of Sydney. We invite you all to come, and for those that cannot be part of it, we invite you to join us online. It would be streaming also live as today, and we will also be joining by Zoom. Thank you so much once again, Jaime and Mark, for being here today, and of course, the best for last. Thank you so much, SRAP, and thank you so much, Angel, for this incredibly hard work that I know that you have been dedicated so many hours to organize this. The floor is yours, and once again from Instituto Cervantes, Sydney, thank you so much. You can't speak? Okay. No sound. Okay. Angel doesn't have audio. So
I have the audio back, but I didn't want to say anything else. I have been talking for too much.
Okay, no worries. Okay, well, thank you so much. It's been an honor once again to have this with you, to organize Energía Nuclear and nuclear energy, and I have had really positive feedback during this discussion. Thank you once again to you, all of our friends from SRAP, and we'll see each other tomorrow. How about that? Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Buenas noches.
Bye. Buenas noches.